everyone. Welcome to this meetup. I'm excited to be here today. My name is Adora, and I am a Pulumi community engineer. And then we have Nana here with us. And we also have Luke from Pulumi, and I'm going to be moderating this panel session, and they're going to be answering questions. If you have any questions about AI in DevOps or anything that we're going to talk about today, please keep your questions for us, because we want you to have plenty of questions. And we're going to leave some time towards the end of this session so that you can ask the questions that you want to ask. So before we get right into it, I will just want to ask Nana and Luke to introduce themselves in a few words.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nana. So I can tell you a little bit about my background. I actually started in the software development. I was a full stack engineer, so it was front-end development. I was like, nah, that's not for me. Full stack development with more backend was like more closer to what I wanted to do. And then I found Jenkins and Docker and Kubernetes. And I was like, yeah, that's the one. And I basically went full-time into Kubernetes administration and then DevOps. And now we're here.
Hi, and I'm Luke, CTO at Pulumi right now, and I've been working on Pulumi for the last 6.5 years or so. Before that, spent a long time building sort of developer tools at Microsoft. So worked on C#. If folks have used C#, anyone use C# here? Okay. Started the TypeScript project. Anyone use TypeScript here? Okay. Worked on VS Code. Anyone use VS Code here? Okay, there we go. And then worked at Amazon for a little while on EC2. Anyone use EC2 here? There we go. Okay. So then I think Pulumi was an opportunity to kind of bring those two worlds of developer tools and cloud together. How do we sort of bring software engineering practices to how we manage cloud infrastructure? So that's what we've been doing for the last 6.5 years or so, and now we're seeing kind of the AI impact on that industry, and so excited to talk about that intersection.
Thank you. So I'm going to start with like an icebreaker type of question, but before I actually start, I just want to hear a quick question from the room. Do people actually before this meetup, have you actually ever thought about AI in DevOps at some point? Ever? Show of hands, something. All right, thank you. So I'm going to throw the question to you and to Luke as well. And the first question that I have is, what does AI in DevOps mean to you?
The first thing, I'm gonna say a disclaimer, I'm a more skeptic of an AI because of the we're probably going to go into details, but because of the reliability, because it's not mature enough. But of course, we have to kind of test it out and play around with it to make it reliable, and at some point have confidence in that. But generally, I think that DevOps and AI have the same kind of approach or mindset, which is about automating things and kind of delegating stuff off to the machines to make our job more efficient, to make our teams more productive, so we can focus more on the business side, the creative side, and not like boilerplate code writing and doing some repetitive stuff. So in that sense, I think both of them follow the same line. The overlap between DevOps and AI, as I said at the beginning, adds to the complexity. But I think if the AI tools figure out how to solve both of those worlds' complexities in one, I think that would be a really big value add. Some of the examples would be the infrastructure as code complexity, to kind of abstract that away and kind of take a lot of this templating away from the engineer role, but also help in the learning process and not just be like an assistant, or instead of me going to the docs and copying the script file, let AI write it, but also like guide me and kind of teach me how to write with best practices. So I think that's where the value of AI in DevOps context is.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think, I see sort of two sides to it. There's sort of like, how does DevOps help with AI and how does AI help with DevOps in a sense? And I think on the first side, there's, when you think about what AI adoption means and what sort of the big, boom in AI actually means in practice, there's sort of like this one layer when you think about what AI engineering is. There's a layer that's sort of prompt engineering and some of these AI specific disciplines. But really the bulk of what you're doing as an AI engineer is actually using the cloud, right? Because a lot of these AI-based systems are being built around cloud native tools and practices and managed services. Oh, sorry, put it in my head. And so I think the fact that we're having to use so many cloud native primitives means fundamentally AI is actually a sort of cloud adoption story, right? And so a lot of the existing DevOps tooling is core to what you're doing as an AI engineer and leveraging AI. And so I think there's a big overlap there in terms of what the needs are. But then I think to Nana's point, I think it's really interesting to see how does AI actually influence and change what DevOps means, right? And I think there's the simple versions of that, like how do we provide tools that just accelerate existing patterns of usage like discovery and documentation. But I think there's then going to be how do we really radically transform what DevOps is and fundamentally simplify it through AI. And I think that's still a very early story, but something we can talk about here.
Okay, I'm going to go back to Nana actually, because there's something you said, and you said that you are a skeptic in some way. And I want to ask you about potential risks associated with like the use of AI in like IaC or platform engineering and like that entire DevOps ecosystem, for example. How do you think that might impact software engineers? So I'm going to start with the bad before we get right into the good.
Yeah, so I think to kind of divide that into two broad categories. So there is one part of AI where it kind of helps you, it's your coding buddy or whatever, like peer programmer, that helps you kind of do the boring like boilerplate stuff. But there's also the part where it kind of helps you actually with the stuff that you don't know about. These are the best practices and so on. And I think there's a misconception of, I'm just going to use the AI to so that I don't have to think about this, or I don't have to deal with this, and can just spit out the code, let's say configuration code or infrastructure as code, and I'm just going to use it. So I think that in order to be able to properly use AI, at least at this stage, you actually have to be really knowledgeable about the tool or the technology that you are letting AI to write code about, so that you can validate it. So I think this is where the big problem is on the reliability. And I think a lot of people should realize that they have the responsibility now to actually check that code, just like you check code of whatever Stack Overflow post or comment, because you have to. But the difference is that the code that AI generates is way bigger and way longer and maybe more complex and nuanced. So you have to have the skills to actually go through and validate, are the best practices, misconfigurations, maybe something is not, it's just going to mess up something. So that misconception of, oh, this is just going to replace my work, it's actually making you work a little bit more, but kind of taking away that boring or boilerplate stuff, but you still need to have the skills. So I think this is where I see the most danger, that people just take the code and kind of deploy it without too much taking too much responsibility of actually validating and going through it and actually seeing that everything is correct. Yeah.
Okay, and now I'm going to ask like a benefits question. And in the context of software engineering, we see people use AI for peer programming and like a bunch of things, and it's helping people be, I don't want to say better developers, but like it's helping with results, right? And I want to know about, in the context of traditional like infrastructure management, how can AI bridge that gap between traditional infrastructure management practices and modern like IaC approaches in DevOps generally?
Yeah, well, I'll actually start with kind of where Nana left off, because I think there's a transition from that even into the real positives, which is, I think there is this common narrative that these tools like Copilot and other kind of, AI-based assistants kind of will replace some subset of developers. And I fundamentally don't believe that is what's going to happen. These are tools that sort of accelerate developers and make them more productive, and are just going to enable people to accomplish more and enable the industry to accomplish more. And I think you see that like, when I look at people using Copilot, and some of the people who get the most out of it are actually the best developers I know, right? They're the ones who are able to do all the things Nana was saying about sort of validating quickly, using these things to sort of guide them, to redirect them in their thought process, help them to think 3 steps ahead because it's sort of guiding them to where they're going. And so I think like these tools are really, they're sort of multipliers on the capacity the developer has, and they're not things that are just for, you know, a junior developer to go look something up on Stack Overflow. They're actually a much more advanced version of that that's helping you to think through and be more productive, even as a very strong engineer. And so I think these are really great tools that are going to make all software engineers even more productive. But then to the point around sort of the DevOps and cloud space and how this, you know, may change things, I think there's a simple piece, which is, you know, one of the things with cloud generally that I think people don't often really directly recognize is just it's absolutely enormous, right? These cloud platforms are huge, and you sort of think like, you know, we at Pulumi build APIs that let you sort of work across every cloud provider, right? AWS, but also like 110 other cloud and SaaS providers. And even you take AWS, for example, the scale of what AWS does in terms of the number of services, the number of configurable parameters on every one of their services, it's so much bigger than any platform. It's bigger than Windows, it's bigger than iOS, it's bigger than any platform, bigger than the web platform in terms of the API surface area. And then you've got dozens of these, right? And you're working across them all, and you're bringing in new SaaS solutions and things like that. And so I think a big part of the complexity of DevOps is just it's enormous, right? And a lot of the, you know, how do you choose which service to use and all these problems Nana was talking about, they're fundamentally harder in the DevOps space than there are in a lot of other application development spaces just because of this complexity and breadth of the platform. And so I think that leads to kind of a lot of these AI-based discovery tools being even more valuable in the DevOps space than they are in other areas, because the question, you know, figuring out what service should I use, or how do I use this thing plus this thing, those are even more challenging, you know, questions to answer in the DevOps space. And I think AI can be really helpful in that. And that's sort of one of the places where we have a Pulumi AI tool that we've built that just helps you ask a question and get an answer in Pulumi code. And you know, that one just as one example of that, which is even a fairly simple use case. Yeah, I remember 6 months ago, 9 months ago, I forget when it was, but you know, I was trying to stand up Metabase on Azure, and I didn't know how to do it, so I was Googling around, how do I do this? And you know, couldn't really find many good examples, right? That just on the internet as a whole, there weren't many good examples of how to do this. I wanted to manage database along with it. So I had this particular need that turned out no one had written any content on this, right? There wasn't anything on Stack Overflow. There wasn't anything in the Metabase docs. And so that content just didn't exist, not just for Pulumi, it just didn't exist at all. And with the Pulumi AI tool that we have now, I can go ask that same question and I get back an answer just on demand, which is 90% correct, right? There's a couple of places where you need to tweak some things to really make it 100% correct, but it gives me a great start that's an answer to that question. That answer didn't exist anywhere, right? And so this idea that these AI tools can answer these really important but potentially unique questions that have never been answered on the internet before is a really powerful thing, I think.
I agree with the Pulumi AI bit of it, because I've interacted with like people in the community that, especially people that are maybe not great in like programming, but somehow want to try out IaC, and then they stumble on Pulumi AI and they're able to just ask a few questions and get started. There are people that have built developer platforms just by tinkering with Pulumi AI, figuring out what works, what doesn't work, and then going to write like their whole thing. But like, you still need to have some level of like knowledge when you're dealing with the AI stuff and when you're dealing with the DevOps stuff as well. So I'd like to ask you, Nana, about the skills and knowledge that you believe that DevOps teams should acquire to effectively work with these new AI tools, because we'll get there eventually, right? Like right now, it's like the beginning of AI. We think we're using AI now, but I don't really think we are. And it's crazy. I was at a conference in Dubai 2 weeks ago, and they were like, oh, GITEX, the year to imagine AI and everything. And now there's like GitHub Copilots happening as well, like currently. And they're talking about like a bunch of AI things. And then we're seeing the OpenAI event, which was like earlier this week. And then we're seeing Microsoft and like other companies as well, and they are betting on AI. So it's like, we're going to be hearing AI for, I don't know if it's a pretty long time, but in the near future, we're going to hear about it a lot. And people are going to have to adapt and integrate it to there are different domains, but since we're talking about the domain of like DevOps, what skills do you believe are needed or relevant for like teams that are supposed to like add this into their new way of life?
I actually think the skills that you need to integrate AI into DevOps is the same skills you need to understand and do DevOps. Because, and I'm again taking a little bit more conservative approach here, but I believe that you first have to understand the things conceptually. Like you have to start, what is my problem? What is it that I'm trying to solve? Because I think that often the tools distract us, especially when they're flashy, new, cool tools, they distract us from the actual underlying problems. So, there's this tool that solves like part of the problem, but it has like these new cool features. So we're kind of inclined and tempted into using that for the things that they're kind of nice to have. So I think you have to start it from kind of reverse engineer to what is it that I'm trying to do? Because AI tools can integrate in different parts of DevOps, right? So the infrastructure as code is just one part of it, or just generally the code assistant service AIs are just one part of it, but then you also have the workflow automations. There are, for example, AI tools that help you, with a natural language kind of give you an interface to generate the complete workflow for the CI/CD pipeline. There are AI tools that help you with automatic observability and monitoring, which is another like huge value added area. But I think that if you do not understand why are you doing this in the first place, you're going to have a really hard time taking those AI tools and matching that and fitting that into your systems to solve the problems, because you have to understand what problem you're solving. And it actually runs parallel to the infrastructure as code itself, which is also relatively new. And a lot of people who don't know how the infrastructure configuration works manually, they will have a hard time actually adopting and learning infrastructure as code tools, because they should understand what are they automating, like what are they coding as infrastructure, if they don't know how that thing is done manually, and they won't understand the benefits of scalability, easy configuration, so all the benefits that basically infrastructure as code tools bring. So I think it's the same exact thing with AI. You have to first start with the concepts and then kind of work your way up through, okay, this is how I do it with traditional DevOps tools. Now, how do I optimize it and kind of make it better even with AI tools?
Okay. There's something that I also want to ask you, Luke, and this is something that Pulumi has done. So I want to ask you in the context of your experience as CTO, and also generally what you think could be the challenges of like organizations when they're trying to implement AI in IaC or AI for IaC, and like how can you address these sort of things?
Yeah, so I agree with Nana. It really, to the first approximation, like a lot of the AI adoption stuff is about cloud adoption, and the fundamentals are going to be very similar. And so I think there's a few reasons why that's true. Like if you think about what it's like to sort of build these AI-based applications, what's unique about them, they tend to have massive compute needs, either just locally that you're managing LLMs and running those locally, or you're using some managed services. They tend to have lots of managed services that you're sort of consuming to build these things. Like a lot of these are being built on top of OpenAI services, or on top of Pinecone services, or on top of other kind of managed service providers. And that requires you sort of manage infrastructure in some deeper way as part of the life cycle of these things. And then they have sort of a very significant sort of elasticity to them, right? The applications you're building tend to be very bursty in terms of the compute they need and the resources they need. And so they're sort of all fundamentally kind of very cloud native. And I think also, just as well as sort of the nature of the tools themselves, the industry around AI and the sort of supporting tools that are available for you to build AI-based applications, they've been built in the era of cloud. And so you sort of saw this with the crypto wave as well, where a lot of the tooling and things, if you were building crypto-based applications or services, even though it was supposedly a decentralized thing, almost all of the actual usage that was driven by crypto was towards cloud, right? And towards centralized cloud services. All of these crypto-based platforms were being built on top of and scaling on top of tools that were about leveraging the cloud. And so we saw that with Pulumi, like tons of usage driven by kind of crypto projects, and now kind of seeing that as tons of usage driven by AI startups, companies serving kind of AI needs. And so I think there is a big piece that, this is just being built around cloud primitives and going to leverage all the fundamental skills that people build up around how to do DevOps and just take them to an even greater level. And so I think in terms of organizations adopting it, I think the biggest piece is learning how to be sort of advanced consumers of the cloud is sort of a key piece. Having great DevOps practices is really fundamental, both to the sort of the application deployment end, but even more so to sort of the companies building services to support kind of AI. And so I think you're seeing that, with a lot of the startups building AI-based services today, they are some of the most advanced cloud, teams you'll find, right? And so I think that's just an important piece of what you've got to factor in. Of course, you've also got to learn the AI specific pieces, but we're here to talk about the DevOps side of that. So
I have another question, and I think I want both of you to answer because I'd like to hear both perspectives. But like in the context of AI and accuracy, they're like, true positives and negatives, false positives and negatives as well. And we've talked about a benefit of AI being like, helping you be more productive. But we know that the accuracy part is also kind of like a challenge, to be fair. So like, how do you think AI is going to impact like the efficiency and the accuracy of like infra deployments, security in the context of like infra, CI/CD, that entire thing? Like how, because now it's like, okay, we're solving one problem of doing things, of thinking we're doing things faster and getting answers to questions that we ordinarily wouldn't have been able to find on the internet. But the chances of those answers being correct and us introducing new problems also exist. So like, how do we like sort of balance that, and what's the impact there? So I'd like to hear both perspectives.
Yeah, I think first of all, the great thing about AI itself is that it can learn. So I think the biggest, because it is true that it's not mature enough. It's, you can't, even if it is, you don't know that. So for example, if we use AI to do the tasks that are more like action-based tasks, where it actually makes the decision to deploy to production, for example, probably 99% of people will be like, no, let's not let AI do that. So that's the thing where, we don't, the advantage of AI is that it makes decisions that we don't really understand. And that's also the big disadvantage, because it makes decisions that we don't understand. So we still need that level of control over what AI spits out and why it actually, gives us that result, or what actions it will take. So I think leveraging the strength of AI to actually teach that, to let it learn from us. So this is how we usually do the deployment to production or whatever, kind of slowly tweak it to the level where like, okay, now the results that it actually spits out, we can validate that, and it's like getting more and more accurate. So we kind of have to work with AI to get it to the level where we can trust it or we can rely on it. So I think it's kind of the parallel development of, okay, we don't trust it enough, but and I think this leads to the point that AI tools themselves, or the developers of AI tools, have to consider this and develop the tools with the interface that lets us control it. So it's gonna control the usage of the tool, but also, that allows us to teach the best practices that we use, for example, company-specific, organizational, internal best practices, and also leveraging maybe the industry best practices, like collective knowledge of best practices of all the Docker configurations, or all the Kubernetes manifest configurations, or infrastructure as code configurations. So I think this is the direction where AI can become more reliable, but for that to happen, we have to also use it and give it input.
Yeah, and I think there's also like the rapid growth here, right, of how good these AIs are and how reliable they are is also going to sort of change what we think we can do with these over time. And I think where we are today, it very much is true. Hey, humans have to be in the loop, you know, and for most of these things. And I think when you think about it as well in the DevOps space, you know, you hear a lot about kind of giving AIs access to tools, right? And a lot of the advancements in AI, you know, models are how do we give the AIs, you know, build these assistants, build these agents that are going to have access to some tools and be able to automate using those tools. And if you think about it, like what is potentially the most powerful tool you could give an AI access to? It's give it your cloud credentials, right? Like and let it like put infrastructure on the internet and sort of make it available and things like. It's probably one of the single most powerful, you know, tools you could put in its hands, and also therefore one of the most dangerous, right? In the sense that it can do very disruptive things if given the ability to just, you know, provision infrastructure in the cloud. And so that's both, you know, in the long term, I think that's incredibly powerful to think about what could it do if you trusted it to sort of operate autonomously with your cloud credentials and to do DevOps tasks sort of on your behalf. But in the near term, I think it's more going to be how do you keep the human in the loop? How do you sort of use it as a learning tool? How do you use it as a code generation tool? How do you use it as a auditing and giving you sort of proactive notifications about potential things you need to look at? I think there's so many places you can use it today that are human dependent still and that have the human in the loop, and it's a tool that's serving humans. But I think it's really fascinating to imagine what does happen if you could trust it to sort of be an autonomous agent, paying attention to all your infrastructure, proactively taking action on your behalf based on some instructions, and the human being more outside of the loop. And I think, you know, probably we will get there at some point, and whether that's 1 year, 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, not yet sure, but we'll see.
I'm back to you, the skeptic. And this is another question that I have. And this is something that has, like we've been talking about this thing for like a very long time. When we hear people talking about AI, ethics always somehow comes into that conversation. So I want to ask you about like ethical concerns. Are there any ethical concerns when using AI to make decisions in IaC or infra management, and how you think we can address these things?
When in the context of DevOps, there is probably less. I would say, or I would assume, compared to other industries, probably less. But there could be a couple of things in the context of infrastructure as code, or I think general the conception of how to use AI or what is it best used for. I think it's like if we see it as a replacement of junior engineers, for example, and you know we just need a couple of seasoned engineers and they're just gonna use AI and that's gonna be the team. I think that's kind of the I don't know whether it's like really in that direction, but I think what this could long-term lead to is kind of taking the junior level engineers out of the loop and being like, you know, we're just going to let AI kind of learn and do the stuff and absorb the internal knowledge. But then we also have to think about the next generation of engineers, like who is going to take their spot. Plus, then you have this thing like, you know, the culture, the team culture, you know, being creative and who's going to do the creative work. So I think that could be one potential thing of like people kind of trying to get rid of the junior level and then ending up with this gap of, okay, now how do we fill the engineer roles? Because I think in the foreseeable future, we are going to need humans controlling and working closely and monitoring the AI. So we can't just replace that. But I also think that long term, we should not replace or reduce the number of junior engineers and kind of teach them and give them the knowledge for the next generation and not just assume that AI will just take over their job.
Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, mostly, just agree with everything there. And I think I do think in the DevOps space, it's a little bit, some of the ethical concerns that sort of would face most consumer-facing applications are just a little bit more muted, just because it's sort of a B2B kind of, it's an enterprise scenario. But I do think there's still, there's just a recognition that any model you use has a set of biases that are sort of fundamental and built in, and it's very hard to understand and quantify those. And so I think just as people build tools on top of them in the DevOps space, being aware of that as consumers of that, being conscious that like this is just, just like some other person who might have some set of biases, you have to kind of recognize that. And as long as the human's in the loop to sort of understand how to incorporate those in, just to be conscious. But I think there is a risk that, these things could lead to sort of, pushing people towards directions that have certain, long-term consequences in very subtle ways, even in kind of some of the DevOps applications. But I think it will depend on how much the humans stay in the loop with the tools, honestly. And if humans are there to sort of participate, then they'll get a chance to sort of decide what they like and don't like about the guidance they're being given.
Okay, so basically it's like this particular problem is more on rather the solution to this problem depends on like us as the people and what we decide that we want to do and how we want to approach this problem. I also want to talk about collaboration. And nowadays everybody somehow, like, one of the reasons why I like tech, and tech can also be annoying sometimes, is that we solve problems, and then in the process of solving problems, we create new problems. And and we had the dev and ops problem, the silo problem. Then we went and created DevOps, and that was great. And we started doing infrastructure automation, and that was also great. But somehow, a bunch of people woke up one day and decided that we actually need to also have self-service, because we want to do this thing called platform engineering so that we can empower developers to also create things by themselves. So now we have the typical engineering teams, we have the SREs, which we need, because the last thing you want is for your application to be trending on Twitter X. I'm not sure the name nowadays, but the last thing you want is for your application to be trending on X because of a downtime and it has something to do with your team. So you need the SREs. And now somehow we also have platform teams, because we are creating those self-service developer platforms for people to just so that automation is better, right? So now, how do you, in the context of integrating AI into things, how would you suggest that teams handle that collaboration? Because somehow it's like, I don't want to say we might be going back into becoming siloed, but there's a chance that if we're not careful, that can happen.
Yeah, I guess there's a few layers to that. I think one is that in some sense, it depends on sort of the complexity of what you're doing with cloud and with DevOps. And I think one of the things that's led to kind of the platform team creation is just the complexity keeps going up of the amount of cloud infrastructure you can use, the complexity that you're trying to sort of get out of the cloud and the value you're trying to get out of using these building blocks. And as that goes up and up, you don't want every single team to go have to reinvent all that complexity and manage all that complexity themselves. You want to kind of go factor that into some common responsibilities and have them build a platform that's a bit of a higher level thing that everyone else can benefit from. I think that was a pattern you saw with many of the largest consumers of cloud, and now it's sort of going down to many other teams. And so I think like AI kind of shows up differently at each phase, right? If you're kind of in a traditional DevOps role, then maybe things like Pulumi AI that are just discovery tools help you to learn how to use kind of existing cloud primitives and connect those together and build these things up makes sense. If you're a platform team, maybe you're trying to actually build your own AI tools to sort of let people use your platform in a more automated way, right? And so I think one of the things we're looking at, for example, is how do we sort of let a platform team create their own Pulumi AI in a sense, right? That's trained on their components and their patterns and their, the things that they provide to the organization. And then kind of for SRE, I think it's going to be a whole different thing. And there it's, mention some of these sort of more, how do I get notified about potential things going on within my infrastructure? And how do I sort of gain insights against that more quickly? And I think there's a lot of opportunities there that are being explored as well for how do I use AI to sort of take the complexity of what's actually running in my production account and give me sort of simple insights against it. So yeah, all three of those.
Okay. I wanted to know if there's anything you wanted to add to that, Nana.
Yeah, I think probably a really interesting use case of AI would be to have it as an interface on the platform or the internal development platform for the developers to maybe even have like a conversational AI that kind of lets them self-service whatever the platform team has built. And then back to Luke's point, the platform team can actually build their own AI that kind of understands the platform specific, like the company specific platform and the best practices and configuration, things that they anyways have to build into the platform, but the servicing of the product teams can become easier and more high level with this without actually losing much of the control. So I think this would be a really interesting use case to integrate that into the platform team. And also to that point of SRE, I think probably even more interesting use case of AI is to deploy it in the automatic monitoring, because I think we kind of do this with DevOps already, where we automate the observability, where we kind of do this predictive analysis and we kind of identify some weird behavior in the systems, and then we get like this automated notifications. So I think we can use the AI tools to make this even better and to enhance or to make the configuration of these things easier, because I think right now the monitoring tools are not the easiest probably to configure, especially the open source ones. So I think this would be another really interesting use case to integrate that in the monitoring or operations part of things that will make the SRE's job easier, maybe even with the self-healing or self-correcting features. So I think this would be actually the places where the AI tools can bring a lot of value.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. When I think about the collaboration between AI and DevOps, I classify it into like there's AI in DevOps and then there's AI for DevOps, right? So it's like it's either I'm using AI in my pipelines to like help with figuring out security issues or vulnerabilities before I have to merge, or I'm using a tool like Pulumi AI, for example, to get answers to questions and stuff like that. But like in these two scenarios, the most important thing is that data is food to AI. Essentially, AI thrives on data. But now there's also the security bits to it that we sort of like have to think about. And my question to you is, how do you ensure that these AI models used in IaC or DevOps generally are secure and free from vulnerabilities that could be exploited in some way?
Yeah, I think that is a general concept of security in DevOps, because the thing is, naturally, when you have many tools and many integrations between those tools, you are increasing naturally the attack surface. So that introduces security issues. So that also comes naturally as when you add another layer of tools. And especially the thing is with security, it's not just that the tools have vulnerabilities, but also you can configure the tools to be exposed with those vulnerabilities, right? If you don't know what you're doing. So I think the learning curve or just knowing the tools and knowing the security best practices of using the tools is a big issue here. And obviously there's a difference between the tools and the technologies, but the more powerful the technology usually is and the more things it does, the more you can mess up when you configure it and when you use it. So if you basically do a validation or evaluation of different AI tools or different DevOps tools in combination with AI tools, and you choose a tool that is really awesome and has lots of features and kind of helps you solve multiple problems instead of just choosing 10 tools for different use cases, that may come with that complexity of now you have to actually understand and use that tool with security best practices. So I think this kind of naturally leads to that and adds to the complexity. How to handle that? I mean, you can use the AI to have the automated scans and to learn about to kind of scan the security issues, and you can deploy other tools on top of that. I think that back to the point, like the more complex your systems are, the more you can mess up. So I think we have this trade-off of complexity and being secure. So we have to kind of balance that out. And whenever we introduce a new tool, we have to be aware of that, and we have to be conscious of that at least.
Okay, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. And I think I liked Nana's earlier framing of like, there's these sort of fundamental concepts that you just have to know to work in DevOps in a sense. And I think having security best practices is fundamental to any of this. I think the AI piece layered on top, as I mentioned in response to a few of these, I think the biggest thing it does is just introduce more cloud complexity in a sense. Like you're more likely to be using more services, more managed services, and that just means you've got to understand the security implications of all those boundaries. I think really the only piece that goes beyond that is just there's an interesting aspect of kind of non-determinism in a lot of these AI-based solutions. And that just makes it sort of a lot of things a little bit harder to validate and test, because there's not just 5 configurations. There's sort of an infinite number of things that could happen. And it's harder to sort of define exactly what those boundaries are. And so I think just being conscious of that, making sure that you kind of incorporate that into design is important from a security perspective as well. But fundamentally, it's, hey, you've got to understand IAM really well, right? It's just a fundamental of DevOps. So.
Okay, thank you. I want to just quickly say that I'm about to open the floor for questions from the audience. So you can start prepping your questions if you have any, because I'm about to ask the panelists my final question. And I want to ask the both of you, in your view, what does the future hold for AI in DevOps, and what trends or innovations do you think we should anticipate as AI sort of solidifies itself in the industry?
I think this is probably very specific to DevOps and now to AI, but it is, as I mentioned, very dynamic, very active thing. So like new tools are being emerged because people are thinking about creative ways of solving different problems, and they're not just settling like, okay, this thing has been solved, so now how do we start standardizing the tool or tool set? It goes exactly the opposite direction of saying, okay, now how do we get to the next concept? How do we make it even better? How do we optimize it even more? And that's what gave us GitOps and platform engineering and all these other concepts. So it kind of continues. So on one side, of course, it is difficult because we don't have like a standard of, okay, this is the tool chain that you use and this is how things are set, but you have like myriad of ways, different ways of configuring stuff, which adds to the complexity. On the other side, however, I think it seems like it's going in that direction of just optimizing even more. Now with AI added, I think the another layer has been open of creative thinkers and people who like to solve problems with creative solutions to kind of really double down on that. So I think because of the AI, that trend has been increased even more of new things popping up in DevOps. So I think it's gonna continue there at least to the point where we see some of the AI tools really maturing and becoming reliable and people kind of getting confidence in that. And at some point it has to standardize, like some of the things have to kind of consolidate and become the standard. But as I said, I think AI kind of push that deadline further in the future. So probably next 10 years, it's going to continue in that direction.
Yeah, I think a few things, I guess I'd say I'm excited to see. One, I think just the higher level services that are continuing to become available in the AI space, I think we're just going to continue to see more and more sort of abstraction of these capabilities. So it's not just I'm directly integrating with a large language model, but I'm building these high level services that I can compose into my applications, which I think just drives a lot of the capabilities that we can use. We can just off the shelf bring some AI-based capabilities into our apps, but it also drives from a DevOps perspective. We have to kind of understand how to integrate those in to our applications and services. And so I think there's just going to be an enormous kind of increase in those over the next few years. But I think then, I alluded to it earlier, but I'm personally just really excited about, what it could look like to actually allow AI to have access to the cloud and to actually do, infrastructure deployment. And so, like we've built little sort of experiments with just a natural language interface to infrastructure deployment. So I don't even have to write IaC. I can just say, make me a website and host it on a public, internet address, right? And it will know how to write the code, do the deployments, that can all be sort of done through some Pulumi code, but I never have to see the Pulumi code, right? The AI can just write it for me and deploy it. And that's, you're obviously giving the AI a lot of power there, but, really interesting things. You can imagine what it looks like in the not too distant future to just have natural language as the interface, to not have to have IaC even necessarily, right? At least for some use cases, at least for experimentation and things like that for now. And so I think there's gonna be really interesting things that, in the DevOps space, but I think we're gonna see other places where natural language interfaces become a really powerful, mechanism to do things. And I think the last is sort of maybe an extension of that, I sort of come from a programming languages kind of has been sort of the thing I've worked on most of my career. And I think I'm sort of fascinated as well to see like how does AI change what we think of as programming languages, right? And is the interface, I talked about maybe the interface to infrastructure delivery becoming more natural language centric, but will the interface to a lot more software development tasks be more natural language oriented? And are we going to see that? And we still haven't seen much of that yet. But even you see some of the OpenAI tools, the way you build these new GPTs is through natural language. You don't write code, right? And so what will that look like? So I think there's going to be some really fascinating big shifts that we see across the industry over the next few years.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. I don't know if anyone has any questions. We can take a few questions before we officially end the panel session.
Hello, and thank you both for the time. It was really inspiring. And my question is specific for Pulumi AI. So you previously mentioned that autonomous agent was not there yet, but I do think code is one of the things that's closest to it. And you said, the example you gave is that an answer is never existing on the internet can be answered by the AI, right? So I'm wondering, in that case, the model does sort of do the actual logical reasoning. And the problem with that is that there is limited data to train the model on reasoning because it's mostly a black box. It's not enough to give the final decision and the scenario itself is a black box. So I'm wondering, just out of curiosity, what kind of data did your model train on, and will it hallucinate in any form?
Yeah, I mean, people use the word hallucinate, which I find funny because sort of it does feel like hallucination, but it's also fundamentally just creativity, right? It's sort of a negative connotation on just a general being overly creative, maybe. But I do think absolutely Pulumi AI will hallucinate, just like any of these AI things. I think we try to do things for Pulumi AI to sort of we combine we use OpenAI models, and so kind of things that are trained on a lot of code and Pulumi code, but also because it's seen CloudFormation and because it's seen all these just read all the AWS docs, it sort of has an intuition about how these concepts should work. But then I think we combine that with retrieval augmented generation, so like using data from our Pulumi registry, which is sort of the exact APIs of every one of these cloud providers, this enormous surface area. So we'll be able to give the AI, here's the API you should use to answer this, here's the APIs you should choose from to answer this question, which makes it much more likely to get correct answers, right? Because it actually has the reference material it needs right in line in context. And I think honestly, the AI tools, the AI models are getting so much better that the cutoff was just improved recently for OpenAI's models, and we'll get to a world pretty soon where you might not even need that layer to do a good job. But we certainly try to do things to reduce the hallucinations. But even with that, even with Pulumi AI, and really with any AI, with Copilot, with any of the best-in-class kind of AI tools, they don't get it right, the first time, right? They get it 80% right, 90% right. It's useful, but you can't rely on that to be the ultimate thing, right? You have to have that human in the loop to sort of edit and take the guidance. And so I think that's definitely how we think about it right now is, hey, it's a helpful thing, but it's not necessarily the answer. To make that jump to the kind of autonomous agent, piece, you kind of have to, it has to be mostly right? And I think there's interesting ways you can do that. Like if folks have used OpenAI's code interpreter, the way it deals with this is it gets it wrong a lot too, but it just keeps trying, right? it makes an error, it gets the error, it tries to fix the error, and it'll often sit there in a loop 5, 6, 7, 8 times, correcting itself, right? And trying again. And so that's one of the things we've looked at doing for kind of these more autonomous things built on top of Pulumi AI is, hey, if they run into an error because they tried to do something that wasn't supported in the cloud, well, they can get the feedback, they can learn from that, they can try and make an update. And that's honestly what humans do, right? I watch people using Pulumi all the time. They try something, it doesn't quite work. They try something else, it doesn't quite work. They iterate in a loop, and the AIs can do that kind of thing as well. And so I think there's a lot of tools we're going to bring in for how to help these things. But no doubt, we're also the AI models themselves are getting better really fast, right? And so what's possible now is going to be totally different than what's possible a year from now.
Hello. Hello, everyone. My question is, so far DevOps has covered mostly CPU-bound applications, I would say. And do you see any difference between current DevOps and DevOps for AI? Are there any specific skills as a platform engineer that someone has to look into if they want to participate in this AI revolution?
I go first, and well, I think I was sort of chuckling because the simple answer is now it's GPU bound applications, right? Not CPU bound. But I don't think that's the most important part. I actually think the more interesting thing is this aspect that I think in the AI space, people are more building on top of managed services than they were in maybe in the traditional sort of like I'm running a bunch of backend servers and I'm just running some compute bound things on EC2 or on some container service. Now you're potentially like you're using OpenAI or using some managed data service for a vector database or whatever it is you're using, but you're composing things at a higher level where what you're running may have very little actual CPU-bound compute in your infrastructure. You're using managed services that are sort of abstracting that away. And I think that's interesting because when you do that, when you decompose an application into a more smaller managed services instead of you just having big black boxes of compute that's yours, it actually it's more managed, and that actually means there's more as a percentage of that application that is a DevOps task, because DevOps is sort of about the boundaries between all these managed services. It's about how do I configure and transition and manage and draw the lines between all these managed services, both at the provisioning time, but also at the sort of observability time. I think at both ends of that, DevOps is sort of fundamentally about how do I take all these boxes and manage them. And so I think DevOps becomes an even more important part once you move away from just, hey, I'm running a bunch of VMs effectively as what you think about your task being. And so I think that AI is just a piece that's pushing us in that direction of adopting more of these managed services.
Yeah, I think that answers this perfectly. So same thing, I think you're naturally pushed to use more of the abstraction level and not work on on a low level, especially in the cloud area when you're building the internal platform for your teams. Yeah. Much.
I think okay.
First of all, thank you both for your time. I kind of have two separate questions. One is, both of you talked a lot about AI not being mature enough today. And I'm curious to know if you guys think Is there a risk where especially junior DevOps people or developers start trusting it more and more because it worked for the first time, it's going to work for the second time, and so on? And certainly, we talked about code generation as well. And if someone uses these AI tools for, say, a Kubernetes deployment file generation and whatnot, and the problems start trickling down into the production environment sooner or later, do you see a risk of that happening? And should we be raising awareness of some sort to kind of use these tools carefully? And the second question is, I'm just curious to know how both of you use AI today personally in your day-to-day lives.
The first one is, that's a good question. I don't think it's going to be too much different. So basically, I think that it should never come to that point where a junior developer can basically just push a Kubernetes manifest file or whatever, like infrastructure as code changes directly to production. So there should be guardrails anyways in the team, either within the team or across the multiple teams, so that, you know, basically as the changes progress through, you know, different stages like development, staging, whatever, there should be automated tests. There should be humans in the process, depending like how much of the tests and scanning you have automated. So I think it should not, in most cases, it should not come to that point. But I think if the team or the company has, you know, a pipeline. So first of all, the first thing is that you should not, you know, be pushing, even if you're an experienced engineer, you shouldn't be directly making changes to the cloud and infrastructure from your local computer. So it should be like pipelined and automated workflow. So I think you can use that as an opportunity to teach your junior engineers why that thing is you know, running through an automated workflow and why not people are not directly pushing that. And I think it will not be too much different than, you know, junior engineers just copying somebody's random code from internet and just using it in the code. I think it's not like too much risk in there, as long as the team has those guardrails and processes in place that kind of just automatically prevent that. The way I use, I mean, as I said, I'm really excited about the new tools and stuff, but I'm very conservative of actually introducing them in my workflows, at least, or when I'm actually suggesting or consulting the companies to introduce them, because first I want them to have the stable working thing, and then on top of that they can do the optimizations, because most of the AI tools, they offer this kind of optimization, especially in medium or smaller projects. I personally use ChatGPT for DevOps to basically, you know, this is the typical code assistant service where you just save yourself time to, you know, generate boilerplate code where you don't have to look up the documentation. The limitation of ChatGPT in that case is the outdated information, which is a big thing, because especially in DevOps, things are just progressing so much. You have the new syntax of a tool or new version. So I usually double check in the documentation if the code generated is the latest one. Usually it's not, so I have to you know, do those changes. But I still think it actually helps, especially if it's a larger thing that I'm trying to generate code for, whether it's a pipeline code or what a configuration code, whatever. It helps at least with the starting point, and then I can kind of adjust and fill in the gaps. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in terms of just in terms of the original question, one thing I'd say slightly different is just, it's not that I think that the AI is not mature enough, it's that it's only mature enough for a certain set of jobs in a sense. And I think like if the jobs are help you find documentation or sort of do the same tasks that Stack Overflow or something might have served, but in a more automated, more customized way, then I think it's absolutely mature enough to sort of be a good substitute for that and to be a huge value there. I think the places I was saying maybe it isn't good enough is, you know, for fully giving it access and automated, you know, being autonomous. I think there's things we have to do to sort of to put in place first. But I you know, that said, I sort of agree 100% with what Nana said, that, you know, in most of the use cases that people are using it for heavily today, it is just a better version of Stack Overflow in a sense, right? And I think it has all those same things that humans have to do to guard for that. In terms of my own usage, I love Copilot. I've been using it for even back when it wasn't very good, pre GPT 3.5. But it is just an incredible tool, and I think I worked on kind of building like IntelliSense features and IDEs and things back at the beginning of my career, and just seeing how radically further we've gotten now, where it's not just I hit dot and I get 10 things, but now it's like I get the next 10 lines of my code. It is really incredible seeing what Copilot, and I love using that just as a consumer of developer tooling. And then obviously Pulumi AI, but that's just a personal thing. So.
Testing. Thanks a lot for the panel so far, and Adora, great job moderating, kept it interesting. You guys really blew my mind on some of these topics, but one of the risks you talked about was of the errors AI can make, the hallucination, the creativity, it being smart. And I'm curious, Luke, if you can comment on, is policy as code like the secret sauce to let AI cook in the cloud? And like Nana, I'm just curious, have you done any content on policy as code? Or I'm just not sure.
I guess I'll answer the first question and then hand it off. Yeah, I think it's a great point that if we let these things go, and I think Nana was mentioning this as well, like if you have the right things in place, whether it's the CI/CD processes or the policy as code, if you have the right sort of guardrails in place, that is going to help. It's going to help the junior engineer to be able to use these tools more, productively, but still have the guardrails in place. But it's also going to help, if we allow kind of AIs to do more autonomous work, to just prevent them from doing kind of the worst things. So I absolutely think it's an important part, and I think for anyone doing DevOps and doing infrastructure as code and doing platform engineering, the policy piece of that is a huge component of just putting in place all the guardrails that are going to help you to have enforcement of best practices policy within your organization. But yeah, the extent to which that is the secret sauce for AI will kind of depend on both how good the policy gets and whether we can kind of scale that up well, and whether we can kind of have the AIs be good enough that they're not making the silly mistakes and they're instead just making the policy mistakes. But I don't know if you've talked about policy much.
Yeah, I think policy as code is really exciting. It kind of has this double benefit of making the lives of the whoever's doing the operations and kind of keeping the developers in check, but also making sure those guardrails are in place. Policy as code actually is going to be included in the DevSecOps course as part of the automation, but I haven't selected the tool, so I still have to do the evaluation of the different tools. So maybe I should, I will consider the AI flavor as well for that. Yep.
Hi, so I'm trying to kind of formulate this question. So you mentioned in the your comment about ethical issues surrounding AI. You talked about, well, if we get it to a certain point, then maybe the job loss will be around junior developers or something like that. So I'm just curious, what do all of you anticipate? Like, you talked about maturity and where AI is, and that it's just not mature enough for certain things, but okay. When do you actually see AI really impacting jobs and companies having to deal with, that real issue of, AI's coming in, it's really effective for these roles and functions. Now we're going to have to eliminate, jobs. So just would love to hear your thoughts.
I can go first. Yeah, I guess my personal belief is that it's not going to play out quite like that, at least in the sort of foreseeable future, that it really is going to be a productivity tool that sort of makes developers, you can pay a developer the same amount and they can get even more done. And I think we've seen that, certainly over the last 30 years of the tech industry, as innovations have come through that have made developers more productive and a lot of other, kind of roles more productive, it is not a sort of thing where the capacity of output stays the same and we lower costs. It's a thing where we keep the cost the same and we just get even more output, right? And I think the return on investment of hiring an engineer just goes up even more, right? The impact of hiring one person is now even more significant. And I think that's going to just be a productivity boon, not a opportunity to cut costs, right? I think the organizations that choose to cut costs because of that are the ones that are going to go out of business, right? They're the ones that are going to lose competition over the long term because technology is still going to be a fundamental enabler of business growth. And so I'm just very optimistic that these tools will just help us as sort of software engineers and as an industry, but also help businesses to just achieve even more with the same level of investment.
Yeah, I actually completely agree with Luke. I think that a lot of the fear usually comes from the unknown, like not actually knowing. And I think even I guess we can't just generally say that AI tools are not mature, because it depends like for which job, which tools, for which use cases. I think for some of the use cases, the AI tools are more mature than for others. But generally, I think that even if those tools were mature right now, there would not be replacement for the engineers. And I think if the companies, because a lot of people still have this misconception of I can replace junior engineers, they will realize at some point that actually that was not the right way to go about it. I also had heard a really interesting saying of the AI will not replace engineers, but the engineers who know how to use AI will replace the engineers. And I think this is true for any other type of development that we've seen in the IT. Generally, like we had, system administrators who were like heavily specialized on Windows servers, for example. And I think generally engineers are compared to other professions, are the ones that are more open to like learning and new stuff, but they're also people that just do not like to change and they kind of want to stick to their tasks. So I think as long as, engineers stay open-minded and kind of, and I think junior engineers have that anyways, because they're not like tied to a tool. Like I've been doing this for 20 years and now I'm afraid to lose my like expertise and learn something new, but they're actually more open than the senior engineers sometimes. So I think from the engineer's perspective, I would not fear that AI will replace me anytime soon. Doesn't matter which stage I'm at, or I would say especially if I'm at the beginning, because as Luke said, I think companies will see a increase in the productivity of the engineers, and I think engineers themselves can leverage the AI tools to make them more valuable and more productive for the companies.
Hi there. This is Michael. Sorry, I've been a little bit late because the traffic on the 101 was like disaster tonight. I work for Facebook at this point. Work Facebook Reality Lab, working on the AR glasses. So I'm very interested in because I check out your website. Just a moment ago, you have a dedicated section talking about Pulumi versus Terraform. Like, what's the difference between these two? I just wonder what's the most pressing feature you want to provide in your product to leverage this trend of generative AI and to grow your business right now. Thank you. Well, you probably discussed this before. Sorry if I let you reiterate.
We didn't really, and so I guess I could do a little marketing pitch or something. But no, I think the biggest fundamental kind of difference between Pulumi and something like Terraform is really kind of we take a software engineering approach fundamentally, and I think that is increasingly important as the complexity of what you're building in the cloud increases. When you're managing 10 or 20 or 100 kind of cloud resources and they're moving fairly slowly, something like Terraform or CloudFormation or one of these tools can be a very good solution. But when you're managing thousands of tens of thousands of infrastructure resources, there's a lot of complexity there. You have to find ways to sort of tame that complexity. And I think software engineering discipline has built a whole bunch of great tools for how do you manage complexity, how do you build reusable components, how do you version those, how do you write tests, how do you do CI/CD. And so Pulumi sort of embraces all those from the get-go and does that through kind of using traditional programming languages. So you can use TypeScript, or you can use Python, or you can use Go, or you can use Java to author your infrastructure and manage that complexity using the best of breed tools to manage complexity at scale. And I think the connection of that into the AI space is really just, it's been a theme of the answers I've given throughout the night, in a sense, is the AI trend is really a cloud complexity trend in many ways, right? It's driving a lot of increased complexity into the infrastructure you're managing. And that means, we see a lot of folks building either AI-based services or their own managed database services or AI services that are their products. And they are managing a lot of cloud infrastructure complexity, and so they reach for tools like Pulumi over Terraform and similar things because they have a lot of these same problems of fundamentally trying to automate a lot of infrastructure complexity at scale.
Yeah, just a quick follow-up. Do you foresee your service will be useful for RAG? And that's because it's like very trendy topic right now, in the tech world, like how you can leverage it for different maybe vector databases or all these different language model agents or whatever. Maybe you can tell a bit more about that. Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, I think in some sense, a lot of the RAG, the technologies using for the vector database are their infrastructure, right? And so that you have to manage some amount of managed service infrastructure, whether that's Postgres in AWS that you're doing with pgvector, or whether that's managing Pinecone, which I think we're going to hear about in a little bit. Whatever it is you're using, that is kind of, there's some managed service you're having to provision and manage the life cycle of, and there's both the sort of managing it for your application, but there's also the managing it for the sort of getting the data into that and the automation processes around that. So I think there's fundamental sort of cloud automation tasks that are fundamental to standing up what you need for kind of RAG. And then the other side is standing up the models and running the models, right? And that it could be something simple where you're just using some managed service like OpenAI. But if you're trying to host an open source model, everyone says, oh, I'm just going to use Llama, and then it's like 3 weeks later you've actually got something running because there's actually some complex cloud infrastructure you've got to stand up to get that side of the kind of RAG thing working. And so I think again, sort of for any of these, building an AI app for real, something like 60% of the work is just cloud infrastructure work, right? And so Pulumi is sort of a great tool for managing that complexity, not because of any fundamental AI feature of Pulumi, but just because Pulumi is great for managing cloud complexity generally. And these applications tend to have a lot of it.
Okay, I think we'll take one more question and then we'll end the panel session.
Oh, hi, I'm curious about the commercial potential upside of AI in DevOps.
You mean the commercial tools or?
No, the commercial upside, like in terms of how big the industry could be.
Well, I think that AI can actually overlap any of the IT industries, and that's why we see like the AI tools can be used in DevOps, can be used in software development, can be used in data science. So I think it is something that can overlap multiple industries that are already large enough. So I think there is a tremendous upside to how big AI can get. Again, my assumption is always that whenever there is a trend and a lot of people entering the market, at some point, in AI case, it's probably gonna take multiple years, but at some point, usually have the standardization where just a couple of tools in each category maybe kind of emerge as the market leaders, and they kind of take over most of the market, because it's just easier for everyone to have like one standard tool, because you can find the engineers for the tool way easily. You don't have like this friction of I have 100 different tools and I have to figure out which ones to use. So I think it is definitely a huge industry. but I think it's going to take a lot of time, a lot of years until we have that kind of standardization where just a couple of companies kind of have the big market shares.
Yeah, so one thing that I found a really fascinating data point recently that I think GitHub announced that they made a public statement that I'm pretty sure I have this number right, that Copilot is $100 million ARR business already. And that like blew my mind. Like think about that. That's a product whose only interface is as a plugin to VS Code, right? Like that's the literal entire interface to the thing. It's a little plugin to a free product. And it's making $100 million a year, right, already. And that I think just gives you a sense of that's like one very narrow use case, honestly, of just like giving you a few lines of code in your IDE, right? Imagine what the equivalent of that, and I think that was a relatively early application of AI that they started on that, before a lot of folks were really taking this seriously. But what is that going to look like when you have the equivalence of that for every other task you're doing, right? And what was the commercial potential? If that's $100 million today, what is everything else? So there's a lot of potential.
Okay, I guess this is where we say thank you to Nana and Luke, and thank you to everyone for being a part of this panel session. Yeah.
Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Thanks.